In the wake of the Timberwolves' latest worst loss of the season contender, it's worth asking, do the Timberwolves simply play to their competition? What the data says next.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. Happy Thursday, everybody. Happy Timberwolves game day. The Timberwolves take on the Chicago Bulls tonight back at Target Center after a long and mostly fruitless road trip. Today, we're going to talk about, in the context of the Timberwolves' latest contender for the worst loss of the season, losing to the Jazz on Tuesday, which was horrific. I still don't know that it was worse than the Hawks game on New Year's Eve. That's neither here nor there. The point is, I want to dig in on, are the Wolves simply playing to their competition? Because it feels like it. The data may actually paint a little bit of a different story, and I've got a couple theories here. I want to talk out, is this an existential concern related to the Timberwolves? And obviously there are issues with roster construction, and we talked extensively on Tuesday's show about trade deadline candidates. We'll talk a little trade deadline in the middle of the show today. I want to talk about some of the Wolves' challenges when it comes to trying to make a trade, really the anatomy of trying to make a trade if you're the Timberwolves in the year 2026. And then we'll close by previewing tonight's game against the Chicago Bulls. A big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere you can watch on YouTube. You can listen wherever you like to listen to podcasts. Okay. So the Tuesday loss was inexcusable. If you want to hear the postmortem on that game specifically, that was yesterday's show. But in considering the 2025-26 Wolves, and I think this team is well, the roster is very similar to last year's. I think in general, there are a lot of things that feel the same as last year. Last year, the team underperformed relative to expectations, coming off a 56-win season 2 years ago. Took a while to integrate Julius Randle, and they ended up winning 49 regular season games, falling to the 6th seed in the Western Conference. And yes, getting to the conference finals, some good fortune with the Steph Curry injury, of course, the second round. And, that sounded bad, but good fortune running into a team that had lost Steph Curry in the second round. That's all true. And there is also an element of the Chris Finch Timberwolves over we'll call it the last 2+ seasons, right? So the 2 conference finals years, the last Cat year, the first Randle year, and this season so far, where it just kind of feels like the Wolves play up to their competition and they play down to their competition. That's what it feels like. And I don't think I'm the only one that feels that way. This feels like a pretty standard Chris Finch Timberwolves thing. And there's certainly a piece of it where we can point the finger at Chris Finch and say, why aren't your teams more motivated to play in some of these games? I think it's more of an Anthony Edwards thing. And I'm not at all like blaming Ant for Ant was like the only guy that looked like he wanted to be there on Tuesday, really, against the Jazz. But that's Ant, right? He always steps up on the biggest stage. He steps up in the big moments. I know the clutch numbers weren't good last year, but they're off the charts this year. And he's great on national TV. He's great in those one-on-one matchups against other star perimeter players. That's all true. He doesn't always get up for the Jazz game on a Tuesday in January, which I thought he was fine. He wasn't great defensively, but he was by far the Wolves' best offensive player this week. He doesn't always get up for the random, Charlotte game in March. Like, it's just, that's a challenge for Anthony Edwards. And the whole team kind of has that vibe about it. So then I looked at the numbers, and on Cleaning the Glass, there's this handy tool where you can filter by opponent point differential rank. Okay, so the top 10, the middle 10, and the bottom 10. I did this a few weeks ago, and I was surprised to learn that the Wolves are actually beating up on the league's worst teams. Minnesota's 16-3, entering play on Wednesday, when the Wolves don't play, but obviously a lot of other teams do. They're 16-3 against bottom 10 teams. The only 2 teams with better winning percentages are the Thunder, who of course have had the easiest schedule in the league and have played just a ridiculous easy schedule. And they're 17-1 against the bottom 10 teams, recently losing to Charlotte. Phoenix is 15-2. Minnesota 16-3, and then you go down to San Antonio, Philadelphia, Boston. So yeah, good teams beat bad teams. That's the lesson here. But against the middle 10 teams in the NBA, based on point differential when the Wolves played them, Minnesota's just 5-5. So a couple things there. One, that's not great. Like, to be a top 3-4 seed in the West, you got to beat mediocre teams, we'll call them, at a better clip than 50%. The other notable thing here is they've only played 10 teams against the middle 10 in the league, or 10 games, I should say, against the middle 10. Boston's played 17. Detroit's played 17. San Antonio's played 14. Miami's played 14. Toronto's played 21 games against the middle third of the league in terms of point differential. Minnesota's only played 10. It's not a complete outlier. I mean, Phoenix has played 11. Phoenix has played 9. The Lakers have played 11. But compared to some of the teams ahead of them in the standings, that's pretty notable. And then against the top 10 point differential ranked teams in the NBA, the top third when it comes to point differential, which is better than just looking at the standings, Minnesota's 6-9, which isn't a horrible mark. Like, by definition, when you play good teams, it's going to be harder, right? That's just how it works. But it is worse than, like, Houston's 8-6. Denver's 9-3. Detroit is 6-1. The Thunder, interestingly, are 9-5, which is obviously a better mark than Minnesota, but not as good, albeit in a couple more games than, say, Detroit and Denver. Now, Detroit's suppressed because they're playing against a bad Eastern Conference, so they have less games against the West and more games against bad teams in the East. But again, that's not the point here. So Minnesota has been just okay against the league's best and medium teams, and they've actually been really good against the worst teams. The Jazz game, believe it or not, was an outlier. And I was trying to think through this, and I couldn't think of the right way to put it. And then I'm gonna give a huge shout out to Casual Sports Fan on X at Diet Begins Monday. Diet Begins MON. Timberwolves fan, big account, follows me on X. So if you're listening, I'm talking about your post the other day that it didn't actually get that much. Actually, it got a fair amount of engagement. But I thought this was a great way to phrase where the Wolves are. And this was a retweet of Hardwood Proxism, our guy Matt Moore, who's also a Locked On Nuggets host, had posted every team has bad losses. I don't know why it feels like the Wolves have so many, and they don't. They're 17-4 versus teams below 500, which is another way of, essentially saying the same thing I just said. So they're 17-4 against teams below 500 record-wise. And as I mentioned, they are 16-3 against the bottom third of the league when it comes to point differential. So the Diet Begins MON Monday X account retweets that and says, the Wolves have had a lot of stretches of games where it goes a win that felt uninspired, a loss to a good team that is understandable, another uninspired win, worst loss of the season contender, team locks in for 5 games and looks like the best team in the league. Now, it definitely feels like that because it just happened, right? So like here, we'll take his or her, I guess, post. A win that felt uninspired. Okay, well, let's go back to right before Christmas. They beat Milwaukee. They beat the Knicks without Jalen Brunson. Kind of uninspired. Then a loss to a good team that felt understandable. The Denver loss was an overtime loss on Christmas. They should have won. They were up 7 with a couple of minutes, or less, or whatever it was, minute and a half to play. They should have won that game, but it was understandable. It's the Nuggets. Jokic went crazy. Fine. The next point on the post is another uninspired win, which actually didn't happen there. They dominated the Bulls mixed in there. And then worst loss of the season contender, 2 out of 3 after the Denver loss, was Brooklyn and Atlanta, both contenders for worst loss of the season. And then we just lived through this again, where there was the uninspired win over Cleveland the first time. Understandable loss on the road at Cleveland because, hey, they played them twice in 3 days. A very nice win against the Spurs. A dominant win over the Bucks. And then a pair of understandable losses, right? Antless loss in Houston on national TV where they had a chance to win that game. They were up at halftime. Then they lose on the back-to-back. No Rudy, no Nas. In a close game, they lose the Wemby shootout. All right, fine. And then they go out and they lay an egg in Salt Lake City a couple nights later, 3 nights later. That's the way the season has gone. And the crazy thing is, if you look at last year's Timberwolves team, it's pretty similar. I'm not going to remember offhand the vibes following each of these losses, but remember, this is a team that was 8-10 at Thanksgiving. Reeled off a few wins, was up and down again in early January. So, like sitting here right now on January 22nd, last year the Timberwolves were 23-21. They're in a better place record-wise right now. And then what happened? Well, they had a couple of brutal, they went on a 5-game winning streak. They had a couple of brutal losses to Washington and Sacramento. Then they beat Houston and they beat Portland and some decent teams that they win against. And then they're 500 at the end of February, essentially. They reel off 7 straight wins, and then you lose 2 out of 3, including, a bad loss to the Pelicans. And like, that's how last year went too. 2 years ago, don't forget, 2 years ago, the first conference finals team did not lose three games in a row all season until the conference finals against Dallas. All season long, including the first 2 rounds of the playoffs, the sweep over the Suns, and then the second round victory as well. All season long, they never lost more than 2 games in a row 2 years ago. And now the last 2 seasons after the first conference finals berth, it's like, I don't know. Do we get up for this random Tuesday in January? And even though they end up winning these games against bad teams, I didn't, the next layer here, I guess I could dig would be, what's the point differential against the bottom third? Actually, I say that. I think it's actually right in front of me. The point differential against the bottom third. Yeah, so against the top third, their point differential is 19th. That's not good against the top third of teams in the league. Now let's look at the bottom third. It's going to be good because they're 16-3, but it's not going to be as good as it should be. It is 13th. And sure enough, Phoenix, who's just ahead of them at 15-2, is first in differential against the worst teams in the league. Minnesota has the point differential against bad teams of a team that's 2 wins worse than they actually are, because they've won close games against bad teams. And that's a problem. So it hasn't manifested in a lot of these losses this year. It just feels like it has, because they barely won games they should win. And yes, a win is a win is a win. And we talk about moral victories and stuff. That can be a moral loss. And then they throw you off the scent with a dominant win against, the Bucks, shorthanded dominant win against the Bucks, even with Giannis playing, and, competitive losses at Houston and the whole thing. And then this sort of thing happens. So it's weird. It's not a straight, like they're they play to their competition, but we have seen in the playoffs last 2 years, outside of losing in 5 games in the last 2 conference finals, which isn't a great way to lose the season, not a great way to bow out. They've been pretty dominant in the first 2 rounds of the playoffs last 2 years, because they can rise to the occasion. The talent level is such that they can rise to the occasion. So what does this look like? Do the Wolves show that they care enough to get a top 3 or 4 seed in the rough and tumble West? Or are they okay with being the 5 seed, having to go on the road, and the prize for winning in the first round is playing the Thunder? That would be a disaster. The 5 seed is the worst possible seed to have, I guess outside of the play-in. Like, you'd much rather be the 3, 4, or 6, or the 3 or 6, really. The 2, 3, or 6 is what you'd want to be in the West. Just, it's such a weird thing. They're a weird team. I want to talk about the weird, it's actually not that weird of roster construction, but I want to talk about the roster construction and some of the challenges related to trying to make a trade here at the deadline, which is 2 weeks from today. We'll do that next. We'll close by talking Wolves Bulls. That's tonight's matchup. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at TurboTax. Tax season does not have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax full service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert start to finish without the stress or guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or connect online. They'll handle everything from W-2s to self-employed forms and work to get you every deduction. You can upload your documents, go about your day, and get updates right in the TurboTax app. It's a huge time saver and gives real peace of mind knowing that an expert is handling it. For a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in if a TurboTax expert did not file for you last year. Just file by February 28th. That's all. And if you didn't have a TurboTax expert file for you last year, you get your taxes done for $150. Take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit TurboTax.com/local to book your appointment today. Big thank you once again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen of the day. And of course, thanks for helping to make Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. If you have not already, please go check out the new Everydayer Club. You'll get access to an ad-free audio feed for Locked On Wolves compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and every other major podcast app. Plus, you'll get an invite to the members-only Locked On Everydayer Club Discord server. It includes a group chat for every show, including this one. And I've been on the Discord the last couple of weeks. There's a few of us that have been in there talking Wolves on a daily basis. You go to lockedonwolves.supercast.com to get signed up, or you can tap the link in the show notes to learn more. All right. So let's talk trade deadline. So if you missed Tuesday's show, go back and listen to it. I listed off a bunch of dudes that I feel like are reasonable fits for Minnesota. The parameters that I chose were guards and wings that made anywhere from the league minimum. I really actually focused on a little bit more than that, but I included a couple guys that were near the minimum, really the league minimum to like $8, $9, $10 million. I didn't go crazy swings. I mentioned Colin Sexton because I think the fit's interesting, and I think that's realistic if you go, like, you can do that, but you can't really go over 19, 20 million bucks without including a significant name, a significant rotation piece in the deal. You could get to trading for, say, a Colin Sexton for the sake of argument, which, wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. But that's Conley plus Dillingham plus one more guy. So Shannon or Miller or whoever to get you to 19 million. You don't have to trade a Naz, a Jaden, a Julius Randle. But that's why I chose that kind of range. I don't think the Timberwolves are going to upset the apple cart and trade one of those three guys I just mentioned. They're not going to trade a top 6 rotation guy at this deadline. I'd be shocked if they did it. And the only guys you're doing that for, and I'm not saying they should do this, but like the names that have been kind of either tangentially mentioned related to the Wolves or would fit the bill as far as, big names who can create for themselves and others. LaMelo Ball, James Harden obviously isn't going anywhere now. The Clippers are playing a lot better, and I don't think the Wolves really wanted him in the first place, but there was a mention at one point. Darius Garland, I have lots of concerns about Garland between the cost and the injury, always the injury problems. I like those things are not happening. The massive swing is not happening. The Giannis swing, I don't think is happening, right? The next layer down is pretty unlikely. The Colin Sextons, I don't know, like who else? That's the one that really stands out to me as far as that like middle range. It's lower than that, where you can go 1-for-1 with Dillingham, or you could go Dillingham plus Conley, and then you're talking, guys like the guys in the range I talked about that aren't great fits. I talked about the other day, TJ McConnell, Luke Kennard, Max Christie's a little less than that, but like you'd probably have to extend him. So like interesting, an interesting kind of like in between there. The most likely scenario is somebody that's a layer below. Benedict Matherin's another one. I don't think he's quite a good enough shooter or a good enough defender to fit the bill for what Minnesota's looking for. But I talked about a lot of names Tuesday, so if you missed it, check it out. The challenges I already just kind of laid out with the Wolves situation that they're in. Like outside of Randle, Reid, they're not trading Jaden McDaniels, Dante DiVincenzo. Like those three, DiVincenzo, Randle, and Reid are the three guys. Like, let's say there's no way in the world they trade Anthony Edwards, Jaden McDaniels, and I'll even put Rudy Gobert in that category. I think they'd do it if somebody floored them, but I don't think it's reasonable. Like nobody's making a Godfather offer for Gobert. He's a huge part of this team. They're not going to trade him this year. So say Gobert, McDaniels, and Edwards are all over here. DiVincenzo, Reid, and Randle are the other three that have sizable contracts that could attract interest. Mike Conley has a similar size contract in terms of what he's been paid this year as DiVincenzo. He's obviously tradable. There's locker room, there's vibes, all that stuff, sure. But the team just has to be better, and he hasn't been good. We talked a lot about that on yesterday's show. The amount of playing time he's getting is just too much for what he's able to do at this stage on both ends of the floor. So you're looking at Conley's, 10.7 million, and you're looking at Dylan, you're looking at Dillingham's, what is it, 6 or 7 million? It's like 6 something, I think. And you could pair those together. You could trade one or the other. Dillingham's going to have more value. Conley's expiring. Dillingham's got 2 years after this one. Of course, options for a rookie on his first contract. But that's kind of it. Like, I don't think Shannon or Miller have standalone value. The only way they get moved is as a throw-in to match like the Sexton example I gave as a third contract. Maybe if they need a roster spot or something and they're flipping one of them for a second-round pick, I'd be surprised if they traded Shannon for a second-round pick. I think they'd probably be open to it with Leonard Miller. But that's why this is such a narrow needle to thread. You're looking for a very likely not anything in the front court. I mean, everybody's healthy at this point. Nas played the other night, and Berger's looked great. So you're looking at a wing or a guard, and not necessarily a 3-and-D guy. Like, just the other day, I talked about why, and I know 3-and-D has changed a little bit the last couple of years, but, like, I like Ayo Dosunmu a lot. He's pretty similar to Dante DiVincenzo. Like, I don't know that he necessarily solves your problem. He gives you improved depth. Like, if you give the Conley minutes to Dosunmu, great. Like, if that's where the Wolves land, I'm good with it. It's just not quite a perfect fit. Trey Jones, I like that fit more. Kobe White, I actually like that fit a little bit more too. I worry about the potential extension for Kobe White. So you're trying to thread a bit of a needle. From a roster standpoint, a position, a very range of salary, a very narrow range of like a salary band essentially, and then ultimately the skill set of a creator that can also defend. Like everybody wants that type of a guy. They could do something on the margins. They could look for a guy, that like a Quentin Grimes or, guys like along those lines. There's somebody I heard on Simmons podcast Bill Simmons podcast the other day mentioned he had Rob Mahoney on. I can't remember who it was. There was somebody who's in the G League that he mentioned as a possibility. Like, could this guy be a guy for Minnesota? Like they could do something fringy like that. It doesn't seem like something it doesn't seem like something Tim Connolly is going to do. So I don't know. I think they do something. I just don't know what it is. If they could convince the Bulls to get out of the Trey Jones business, that's at the moment, that one and Scottie Pippen, who of course isn't going to help you for a month. But if you figure the Wolves could stay out of the play-in over the course of the next month to 6 weeks, Scottie Pippen Jr. in the playoffs and next year could be a really nice fit for this team. But it's an interesting needle to thread. Let's close by talking Wolves Bulls. That's tonight's game. We'll preview that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Quo. New year, new systems. This is the time when a lot of us look at the messier parts of how we run our business and think there has to be a better way. And there is. Streamlining your communications is one of the quickest upgrades you can make. And that's why today's episode is brought to you by Quo, spelled Quo, the smarter way to run your business communications. Because when your team is reachable, organized, and communicating in one place, you're not just working cleaner, you're creating more opportunities to connect with customers. I love how simple Quo makes everything. Your whole team can call and text from one shared business number so nothing gets missed. Everyone sees the full conversation thread, which makes replies faster and more personal. It works right from your phone or computer. You can even keep your existing number, and Quo's smart AI tools automatically log calls, summarize conversations, and highlight next steps so details never slip through the cracks. It's no surprise that Quo is the #1 rated business phone system on G2, trusted by more than 90,000 businesses, from solo operators to growing teams. Make this the year where no opportunity and no customer slips away. Try Quo for free. Plus, get 20% off your first 6 months when you go to quo.com/LockedOnNBA. Again, that's Quo, QUO.com/LockedOnNBA. Quo, no missed calls, no missed customers. All right, let's talk Wolves Bulls. Last time we saw the Bulls was just after Christmas. It was back on, let's see, what's the date? It doesn't really matter. It was right after Christmas, though. December 29th, the Monday following Christmas. And Minnesota was coming off of the terrible loss to the Nets at home on Saturday, which came off of the tough Christmas overtime loss to Denver. So kind of a must win for Minnesota. They go to Chicago and come out of there with the win. It was a dominant win. They won by 35. A couple caveats here that are important to point out. The Bulls lost Kobe White early in the game due to injury, and then they lost Josh Giddey, I think at halftime or just before halftime with an injury as well. So Kobe White and Josh Giddey both played and both left due to injury, which was a massive help for the Timberwolves. And then, of course, they won by 35. Then they went out 2 days later in the matinee in Atlanta and got crushed by the Hawks in just a miserable performance, which I still think was the worst wire-to-wire loss of the season. That one, the Nets loss, and the most recent one, the Jazz, are the three worst. But I think the Atlanta one was just, and I know Atlanta is the best of those three teams, but that was just a completely uninspired performance where they just mailed it in. Anyway, the Bulls game, they won by 35. Tons of garbage time in this game. Vucevic was fine for the Bulls. That was really kind of it. Nobody else came to play for them. Jalen Smith looked nice off the bench. And it certainly helped that White and Giddey both left early due to injury. The Wolves in this game were full strength. So they had Ant. He had 23 points on 9 of 13. Ultra efficient, only played 32 minutes. Rudy had 9 and 10. Julius Randle had 17 and 14 assists in this game. Had a rough start offensively. Missed a bunch of shots early. This was kind of, I think, the start of his shooting slump from outside the arc. But he had the 14 helpers, which was great, to no turnovers. Minnesota only turned the ball over 3 times in this game, which is just unbelievable. Which brings me to one of my points about the Bulls. Chicago's actually been decent. They're a game above, well, no, they're not. They're a game below 500 overall. They're a game better than 500 since the Wolves saw them after Christmas. Defensively, they're actually fairly middle of the pack in both. They're on cleaning the glass. They're 19th defensively, 16th offensively. They're 29th forcing turnovers. They just don't force turnovers on defense. The only team that forces less turnovers percentage-wise defensively is Denver. They're 29th, and again, they forced 3 against the Wolves the last time these two teams played. That's really the only area that they're miserable defensively. They don't have a lot of great one-on-one defenders. They give up drives. They've got a couple guys. Obviously, Isaac Okoro is a good defender, but besides him, Kobe White is spotty. He's been banged up. Josh Giddey can be good. He's a good defender. But it's I think spotty is the best word for it. Offensively, kind of the same. They don't turn the ball over. They get themselves good shots. And they're a good shooting team, generally speaking. They've had a lot of weird injuries this year. A lot of guys kind of in and out of the lineup. They are top 10 in three-point rate, and they're 12th in percentage. So it is a good shooting team. They get to their shots. They also play faster, 5th in pace, which is something to keep an eye out for. I think Minnesota can't afford to play fast against the Bulls since Chicago doesn't force turnovers. And also, in addition to that, the Bulls don't get to the free throw line. So you're not going to have to worry as much about that. So I think just play fast. You're fine with playing with them, or you're fine to play with them, and you should be just fine in this matchup. Lately, though, Chicago has played well. They beat a resurgent Clippers team by 28 on Tuesday. They also beat Brooklyn by 22 the game before that. Overall, they've beaten a lot of bad teams here recently too. The Pelicans, the Mavericks, and the Jazz, who of course the Wolves just lost to, and then the Nets. So their only good win since the last time the Wolves saw them would have been Orlando, who of course has been a little disappointing, but that's still a good win. And then also the Clippers win just on Tuesday. So this is a bit of a tricky game for the Wolves. They've got 2 against the Warriors upcoming this weekend. They've got to lock in, and it seems so silly to say must win, but they cannot lose a 4th game in a row. They can't lose to another below 500 team. My keys to this one would be play fast, which they did early against Utah, and then, try defensively, because they didn't against the Jazz. If they try defensively, this is a team that they should be able to lock in against and defend just fine. They're very middle of the pack offensively, and they're middle of the pack when it comes to, or I should say they're bottom 3rd actually when it comes to offensive rebounding. So don't even worry about that. Just defend on the perimeter, run when you get the chance. I should also mention Chicago had a couple guys miss Tuesday. Josh Giddey didn't play Tuesday due to a hamstring, and Patrick Williams didn't play either. unclear if they're going to play against the Wolves. Last I saw is they're both questionable for Thursday's game, so that's notable. Of course, if those guys do not play. So keep an eye out for the injury report. And again, winnable game for Minnesota and an important game for Minnesota. We'll have the live postcast with Luke and Jack following the show, or following the game, I should say. I'll be back on Friday morning with the post-game pod. We'll talk Wolves, Bulls, and what went down on Thursday night, as hopefully the Wolves put an end to this 3-game losing streak. That's all we got for you today. Big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. Of course, if you never miss an episode, make sure to check out the Everydayer Club. You can go to LockedOnWolves.supercast.com to check it out. Get Locked On Wolves ad-free, plus members-only Discord access and more. Again, LockedOnWolves.supercast.com to join the club. Also, if you're watching on video after this, we'll send you to the first ever 24/7 National NBA YouTube channel on audio. Make sure that you make your second listen the NBA Game Night Show on Locked On NBA. Of course, Locked On Wolves is also part of the Locked On Network, your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.